All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending GISMO's webinar highlighting Joshua Delmonico. This is our last event of the year, so happy holidays to everybody just the same. So I am Dara Mendeloff. I'm the interim president here at GISMO, and I'm thrilled to host this event with my colleagues Amy Ju, Alan Leidner, and Joshua Delmonico. A little bit of background about GISMO and how we got here. GISMO was founded in 1990 and is New York metropolitan area's largest software and industry agnostic GIS users group. We have a lot of members that attended, but some of you probably have nothing to do with GISMO, and we hope that you'll join us shortly after this event. What we do is we bring together data-minded members from city, state, and federal government agencies, nonprofit organizations, private and academic sectors. This next year will be our 35th anniversary. So over that time period, we've had plenty of GIS activities in New York City, and we continue to be a valued forum for sharing information and well-established and emerging geospatial technologies, which is why we have invited Josh to speak with us today. We'll have a Q&A session after the talk, and if you enter your questions into the chat, I think that's how we'll administer your Q&A. And Alan, take it away.
Okay, so it's my privilege to introduce Josh, I hate using Mr. Delmonico. It sounds, but I'll use it this one time.
Mr. You can just say Josh. That's fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. Josh, by the way, I'm a long-term member of GISMO. Josh serves as the Executive Director for the Federal Geographic Data Committee, providing the leadership, coordination, and communication to promote development, use, sharing, and dissemination of geospatial data nationwide. In this role, he provides executive leadership for the coordination of U.S. federal geospatial activities in collaboration with 32 FGDC member federal agencies, those are the GIOs of federal agencies, and OMB, to implement the Geospatial Data Act and conduct strategic planning and visioning for the implementation of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, or NSDI. Previously, Josh led several geospatial programs for the Department of Defense, where his portfolio included architecture, engineering, standards testing, enterprise system development, modeling and simulation, 3D, AR and VR, and artificial intelligence. He has a BS in biology from the State University of New York at New Paltz, New York guy, and in 1994, and an MS in National Resource Strategy from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces in 2010. And before I turn it over to Josh, I just wanted to add that if anybody on the call is wondering, well, you know, what does the federal government do for us? Why should we collaborate with them? I would just like to quickly say that they are amazing in what they make available to state and local governments. It includes the entire global positioning system that gives us the accurate X, Y, and Z coordinates, weather sensors that predict weather for us all. They are behind the census and all that census and housing data, demographic data, and also, from my personal experience, the critical infrastructure, hundreds and hundreds of layers of critical infrastructure. And that's just scratching the surface. And at some point, we ought to come out with a full listing of everything that the federal government does for us. But for the moment, I'll leave it at that and say, Josh, welcome, and look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Thanks, Dara. I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to be here. I will start my presentation. And it's nice to see everybody. If you were on after I said this, I'm a native New Yorker, grew up around Syracuse, and always have a fondness in my heart for New York. So let's see. Thank you. All right. Try to do this without making everybody look at themselves. All right, can you see my screen okay, Alan?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Spatial Data Infrastructure and the NSDI, what it is and why it's important to New York City. And I will start by saying that the briefing I'm going to do, I'll mention at different points, New York City, cities, counties, states, and local government. So, what I'm going to talk about and highlight New York as really can also be true if you're looking at it from a county or another part in the state or a state perspective. So Alan talked a little bit about this, but I thought it'd be important to take just a minute and talk about the what the FGDC is, and we're a 32-member interagency committee. So if there's a federal agency you've heard of, chances are they're a member of the FGDC, and if they're doing even more a federal agency doing geospatial stuff, then they're part of the FGDC. The Geospatial Data Act in 2018 established the FGDC as the lead in the executive branch for policy, practices, and standards relating to geospatial data. And by being the lead in the executive branch, that really puts us even above OMB. So a pretty significant role in the federal government for geospatial policy. You can see the pie chart on the right really lays out about the major 5 things that the Geospatial Data Act did. Really defined responsibilities for the geospatial data portfolio for the federal government and FGDC. Our standards responsibilities, the reporting and tracking to Congress for their role in oversight, management of the geo platform, and then the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, which is what I'll focus most of today's briefing on. So some of the highlights of the duties the FGDC is responsible for in the Geospatial Data Act is starting at global and going national, and then on the federal side, coordinating with international organizations on spatial data infrastructures and really being consistent with international standards and protocols. We led the development of the NSDI Strategic Plan as well as geospatial policy. We define roles and responsibilities and really promote and guide cooperation and coordination, not just among federal agencies, but also with our non-federal partners. So that's state, tribal, and local governments, academia, and the private sector related to the use of geospatial data and information and implementing the NSDI. We also advise users on their responsibilities related to the NSDI. On the federal side, we coordinate the management of the federal geospatial portfolio. We have a role in establishing standards that federal agencies have to comply with and operate GeoPlatform, our system, if you're not familiar with that, for sharing geospatial data from the federal government. And then fostering communication and coordination across our member agencies and reporting to Congress. So a lot of responsibilities in the geospatial space. And I'll talk a little bit more about how those, particularly related to the NSDI, how those filter down to states and local governments. So one thing I think is important to take a minute and look at, where the state and New York City kind of fall in how they're doing in the NSDI and geospatial in general. And I think I'd say, New York's doing a great job. You can see their geospatial maturity assessment from NSDIC on the right-hand side, laying out the state-led and federal themes and kind of the grades there. And I think, if you looked at New York City's, if they were to be graded, I think they would be, certainly at a level of a state or maybe even an A or A minus. But, New York's doing an outstanding job in their geospatial management and developing data and making that data available. And in the context of, it's not all about the geospatial data. It's really about what we're doing with that geospatial data. And really, I think why we're all here today and what many or all of us believe and have dedicated our lives to is that, geospatial data and technology is key to addressing the challenges you see on the screen, and really no other technology is better suited to do that. And that's where spatial data infrastructures or NSDI kind of comes in. I think it's useful to spend a minute, there's some discussion about people saying, well, I don't really know what the NSDI is or what's included in the NSDI. So I like to take a minute and talk about that. And I really think at the top of the slide, the National Spatial Data Infrastructure really are or is the geospatial capabilities of the U.S. It's the data portals and metadata, it's the geospatial data that's collected, in localities and cities and municipalities and in, nationally and at the state level. It's geospatial data created in offices and organizations and universities, and we have a huge portfolio of data in this country. And then it's the data portals and metadata catalogs that allow you to find and access that data, the applications and tools that enable you to use that data, and then the infrastructure that makes all of that possible, the people, the policies, the governance, and the standards. And really that's what I think of as the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. And on the right-hand side, I think sometimes it can be useful to just say, the NSDI is really all parts of a three-legged stool. It's, national. It encompasses, local, regional, and national data collected by multiple sectors. It's data that's spatial in its form, so mapping data that's national, and then it is that underlying infrastructure that enables you to interact and use that data to solve the challenges I talked about a couple of slides ago. Another way to look at it is that this infrastructure is much like the interstate highway system. There are county roads, there's state roads, there's local roads, and then there's a national roads network that connects all of those roads. And if you think about the NSDI, it's really that same concept, but connecting local and national data and making it available around the country. It's the digital infrastructure that connects the nation's data, which enables us to do decision making and address the challenges we face. Some of the ways the NSDI is being used is really things you all work in every day. E911, disaster response, broadband, energy, GPS navigation, tribal lands, infrastructure management, routing, and logistics. And when you think about it on a federal scale, you can see some examples on the left and right side of this slide, but really geospatial data is being used by federal agencies to deliver and improve services to our citizens. I thought it was important to take a minute and talk about local, state, and federal data. So, there's data that's collected at the local level and sometimes conflated at a county or state level or even national level, data like roads data, address data, buildings and parcels, underground utilities, sometimes even buildings in 3D. All of that data is really collected at a local level. And then federal data sometimes collected nationally, so federally owned land parcels, national elevation and hydrography, address data from the National Address Database is really an example of pulling together local and state data and integrating it into a national data set. So this, Alan talked about this up front, but bringing together really data from multiple jurisdictions, and there's some data that the federal government provides as authoritative data for state and local use, and some data that state and local governments provide up to the federal government that we use nationally. So, why the NSDI is because we have significant challenges, things like natural disasters, extreme heat, migration, natural resource management, infrastructure management, and things like that really all connect at artificial administrative boundaries like cities, counties, states, and even national boundaries. And since those things like natural disasters don't stop at jurisdictional boundaries, we really need to be able to facilitate and coordinate across those boundaries. And everyday activities like moving an ambulance or a fire truck or delivering even packages or pizza require many people to work across those administrative boundaries. And how do we bring all that data together is really through the NSDI and trying to think how we can work better. And to do this, we just finished a national strategy in October for the NSDI, and hopefully you've seen that. If you haven't, it's out on the FGDC's website. I'd be happy to share it with you. I'll talk more about it later in the briefing, and we're also doing some NSDI pilot projects. One I'll talk about at the end here, and then there are a few others being worked as well. But delivering the NSDI will require us to have a complete, consistent, and standardized data set across administrative boundaries nationwide. So I'd like to talk a little bit about New York City's role in the NSDI. And, cities, county, and state governments, as Alan mentioned, are not only key users, but key contributors into national data sets. And New York plays an important role in contributing your experiences to establishing nationwide best practices. So things that you've learned in New York City really can inform other people dealing with the same challenges that you're dealing with. I think collecting data and making that data available is certainly a key component of New York City's role in the NSDI, complying with standards, and also building things like applications and tools, not only to make your data available, but to make it usable, and then sharing that experience and with other people facing those same challenges. Also, capacity building and training is another key place that I think New York City plays a key role in, training and providing those opportunities inside and around the state for people to learn geospatial and contribute. So I like to talk also a little bit about the breadth of the NSDI. So when we talk about a national spatial data infrastructure, what does that national really mean? Well, there's hundreds of federal agencies. There's 15 or 54 states and territories. You look at the city level, there's 19,495 incorporated cities, towns, and villages, and 574 recognized tribes. There are 675,000 geospatial professionals. That's an old number, so I'm sure it's higher than it was then. And about 333 million citizens. 65 countries around the world have spatial data infrastructures, and many of the organizations that make up the numbers above are data producers and consumers, and many provide geospatial data and tools online. When I talk about, the NSDI today, I think it's important to stop and think about what we've accomplished in the last 30 years, because the NSDI concept has been around since about 1994. And you might imagine I talk a lot about the NSDI, so a lot of people share their perspectives with me. And one perspective I get is, we've been working on this for 30 years, so why are we, aren't we done, and why are we still talking about it? So I think it's useful to take a minute and look around the country. So the NSDI today really, I think, starts with number 4, foundation geospatial data. I talked about it a couple of minutes ago, but we have we are a data-rich country. That's not to say that we don't have gaps in our data or significant work to do, but we also have a lot of data. And if you compare the data we have available today to what we had 30 years ago, I think you start to understand the progress we've made towards a national spatial data infrastructure, because that foundation geospatial data is really, the base or the foundation for which the NSDI is built on. Then that data is available through a standards framework that underpins everything. We do things like web services that through the Open Geospatial Consortium have been available and underpin technology used around the world. We also have that data, make that data available, as I mentioned a minute ago, through data portals and metadata catalogs, and is usable through tools and applications. I would suspect many of you online today listening to this briefing have or are responsible for managing and maintaining data portals, metadata catalogs, geospatial tools, or applications. And so that, even 10 years ago, I don't think the quality, quantity, and capability existed that we have today just between our data and our tools and applications. And there are robust coordination and collaboration mechanisms like the GISMO, like FGDC, places like the Open Geospatial Consortium, and then policy and governance frameworks like the Geospatial Data Act. We've got, state legislation in some states, policies in organizations, and even things like best practices. So when I think about the NSDI, all of the things I described are what we've been doing for the last 30 years to get us where we are today. But we still have a lot of work to do. One of the challenges that we face with implementing and improving the NSDI is it belongs to everybody, but then that makes it hard because who's responsible for it and how does it get funded? We have many organizations with competing priorities in an incredibly complex environment with limited funding and an accelerating pace of change in a really high stakes environment. And if that wasn't enough, we have shrinking budgets. We have so much data out there, it's too expensive and time consuming to build and maintain and conflate. It's hard to find, and even when you find it, is it any good? I thought this E.O. Wilson quote was really good, particularly the first part, we're drowning in information while starving for wisdom. And I think this really vividly captures the place we are today with geospatial. We have a ton of data, and it is still too hard to ask questions of that data and to really get actionable information out of the data and move forward with it. And really, I think that our responsibility as geospatial professionals is to consider the idea that there's value locked in our data in terms of time and money and lives and productivity and opportunity costs. And it's our job to unlock that and get it into the hands of the people, get the data into the hands of the people who need it so they can use it to make a difference in the world. So how are we going to do that? Well, we, about 18 months ago, Deirdre Bishop from the Census Bureau and myself co-led a team from these agencies that you see here to stand up and redo our National Spatial Data Infrastructure Strategic Plan. We engaged with over 1,000 individuals and organizations and went to conferences and conducted webinars and also did a public comment period to develop the strategy, which was endorsed by the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, which is it's our mechanism on the federal side to get input from the external, outside the federal government. So we have, we meet 3 or 4 times a year with some of the best and brightest in the country thinking about geospatial stuff, and they give their advice on how we can do this better. So the NGAC endorsed the strategic plan, and it was approved last October. And in that plan, we put out a vision and a mission statement, and the plan timeframe is from now till 2035. So a seamlessly interconnected national geospatial ecosystem, and the mission being delivering highly responsible, timely, dependable, interoperable public and private geospatial data applications and services that provide knowledge on demand and actionable insights to address local, regional, national, and global challenges. We had 3 goals and 10 objectives. You can see the goals on the left and the objectives going from left to right in the rows. governance, data and technology, and people being the three goals. And we thought that it was important to also identify what the roles of the NSDI were. And being a cinnamon roll person and a dad, I couldn't resist the cinnamon roll pun there. But some of the roles we think in the NSDI are listed on the left: consumer, a producer, an aggregator. You might deliver capabilities to the NSDI or provide those. You might be an advocate or a champion. You might also lobby or fund or invest. If you think I've missed any, I would welcome your thoughts and ideas there. And as I mentioned up front, I'm going to talk a little bit about cities here, but you could easily also think about counties or states or other jurisdictions or organizations in here. But I want to talk a little bit about how you might be able to use the strategic plan to think about and impact what you're doing at your local organization, or in this case in the city. So I think that New York City has, or cities have, responsibilities or actions in each one of these areas, and I'll talk a little bit more about them as we go through the slide. As an example on how to use the strategic plan to think about how it might shape the work that you're doing, I'm going to focus on the kind of the data objective here. So when you think about data and technology, one of our objectives is the data objective. So if I was looking at the data objective, you can see on the screen here, the data objective is to ensure national geospatial data portfolio is accurate, up-to-date, and accessible to support critical applications for all. And then the expected result is critical and trustworthy geospatial data that's readily available to all users, thereby ensuring an opportunity for consistent, equitable, and quality decision-making. Priority national data sets include national parcels, addresses, buildings, structures, hydrography, imagery, utilities, elevation, and bathymetry, land use, trails, roads, road electronic navigation charts, and boundary data sets utilizing the necessary framework and standards. That's a lot of words, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how you might turn that into action at your organization. So in this case, I have state, but you could look at, if you take all of the action words and descriptors out of the plan, you could restate it into a question and say, does my state have accurate, up-to-date, accessible, and trustworthy, and then listing of all of the data sets that we put in the plan as priority national data sets readily available to all users using the necessary standards. And then you can use the strategy to identify the gaps. And I really like thinking about, so we could pick one and say buildings and structures. So that's my focused again on the data objective. But I can look at the other objectives in this table to sort of start to highlight where I might have gaps or what actions I might be able to take. So the first question I would say is, do I have buildings and structures data? Then there are a number of things up there at the top of the slide, like, are they accurate? Are they up to date? Are they accessible? And are they trustworthy? And do they utilize the necessary standards? And are they readily available? Now, when you look in the plan, I like to start in top right-hand corner, 1.3. So do I have all of the financial support that I need to collect, in this case, buildings and structures data? So that can help you to think through, are you resourced to do that? What might you need to do to either advocate for those resources, or, maybe you have, but assuming no, then, okay, are the standards in place? Dropping down a column, do the standards exist to collect buildings and structures? And you might ask yourself, well, if they do exist, great, then I'm going to go find them because I want to make sure I collect my data to a standard. If they don't exist, you could ask yourself if that's a role that you might be interested in playing or is appropriate for your organization, or do you want the state to do that, for example? Or do you have the expertise to contribute and you want to join the Open Geospatial Consortium and work on building a buildings and structures standard? Or do you have some money, maybe you want to contribute it to the Open Geospatial Consortium to develop a new standard, for example. You could drop down to communication and engagement. Is there a strategic communications component to getting funding for the buildings and structures data that you need? Do you have the right people on 3.2, and do they have the right training to collect and build the data that you need? Is there any innovation that you might need either to fund or to learn about or wait for to be able to collect buildings and structures? So things like AI are a good example there. Could you use artificial intelligence to help build your buildings and structures data? Are there any policy and legal either barriers or drivers for collecting that data? So I think that can help you do an analysis of the policy and legal environment. Are there any partnerships you might be able to undertake? Are there any national or federal organizations already collecting buildings and roads? Or are there private sector companies doing this work today? So are there places that you could work together to build this data and maybe offset some of the financial requirements you have to collecting it? And same, governance and institutions. Are there places that you can work with to help either tell the story about the need for this buildings and structures data, or are there other organizations already engaged in doing this work that you can work on? So I think this is an example, and I think you could go through multiple data sets this way, or different objectives, and ask the same questions that from a little different perspective inside each objective, to use the plan to help drive the work that you're going to do in the city or in any other organization over time. And I like to talk about this example because here's an example where in North Carolina, they were able to utilize local data available up through the state to drive federal investment to offset a deficit in number of broadband locations that were being serviced. So in this case, North Carolina's one map, they got information from the broadband project out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. FCC had identified a number of number of houses in North Carolina that didn't have broadband access, and the state knew, because they had local data, that there were quite a few more locations that didn't have broadband. And so North Carolina was able to use local data conflated at the state level to tell a story to the federal government to get 115,000 additional houses and businesses high-speed internet, and they were able to get the money from the federal government to fill that, and that was because they had looked at a local level and brought that data together at a state level. That's a great example, I think, of sort of a local to state to national collaboration that really worked because they had the geospatial data and they could make it available to the federal government. So if you ever wonder why it's important to share your local GIS data or why people might be interested in that, I think this is a real world story that emphasizes some of the opportunities that are out there that show why that's important. So when you think about the federal FGDC and New York, I think we can work together on the National Spatial Data Infrastructure and coordinating on what we're doing and where you guys are working. There's places to collaborate on standards for geospatial data and metadata, data access and sharing, and certainly advocacy and outreach and telling a story of the importance of geospatial data together. When I talk about the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, I also like to take a minute and talk about what FGDC is doing in addition to leading the plan, because I think it's important to show that we're doing this work ourselves, not just talking about it. So we're leading a national conversation on the NSDI, and we're not only having just finished the strategic plan, we'll be working on an implementation plan with state, local, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits, academia, and the private sector. So really looking at how do you put dates and organizations and measures and metrics in implementing the plan. We engage with the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. That's our non-federal advisory committee. They play a key role in helping us understand a non-federal perspective to make sure that we're building truly a national strategy. We're updating our standards framework and our policy. We're hiring an NSDI Geospatial Data Coordinator. So we used to have an NGDA Coordinator, National Geospatial Data Asset Coordinator, which was really more federally focused, and we've changed the focus of that to be a National Spatial Data Infrastructure Geospatial Coordinator. So I think it's really important that we consider not just federal needs in our data, but national needs. So that's an important change for us. I mentioned the strategic plan already and the implementation plans. We also just kicked off a modernizing SDI project with the Open Geospatial Consortium. And I'll talk about that here for a minute. So over the last 30 years, the spatial data infrastructure landscape has changed, and rather than a top-down, it's really a truly collaborative environment. And so how do we make this geospatial ecosystem thrive? Well, after finishing the plan, we wanted to demonstrate the vision in the plan, so we kicked this project off, FGDC did, with the Open Geospatial Consortium, and we wanted to showcase the latest capabilities in SDIs, not just in the U.S., but around the world, and advance the capabilities that we might need to achieve that vision in the plan. Things like global interoperability, self-updating maps, and intelligent search and discovery. And then we also wanted to raise awareness of new ideas and concepts that are in spatial data infrastructures around the world. So we're going to stand up an SDI demonstrator website that'll also provide learning resources and visualize SDI impacts, as well as give people a chance to really interact and access the SDI in the U.S. OGC will be issuing a call for participation in the first quarter of 2025, really looking at connecting the ecosystem, solving common challenges, and advancing SDI capabilities. So this is a really exciting, and I hope New York and New York City will participate, and we're still working out the details of exactly what that looks like, but we'll open that up in the next 2 or 3 months, I think. So I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Josh. That was fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any closing words, Josh?
Just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and appreciate that, and appreciate the time, and happy to help in any way I can. So feel free to reach out, and let's do it again. Maybe I'll make one in person.
Yes, you're welcome to come down. Come back to New York.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. So.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. That was really great.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we'll be in touch. Happy holidays.
Thanks.